Thanks, Malcolm. That's great. Well, thank you all for coming. It's a huge delight for me to be doing this with Dave. Dave and I go back a long way, as some of you will know. So just to begin with a very small bit of biography for Dave. Dave studied English and sociology, I think, at Stirling University in the 70s. And he became a musician and a songwriter, and he still is a musician and a songwriter. And this relationship between photography and music, I think, is something that pervades his work and has pervaded his work really throughout his career. He became head of photography at Edinburgh College of Art in 1990, succeeding the wonderful Murray Johnson, who was head of photography at ECA before Dave, and sadly died of cancer in 1990. So a hard act to follow for Dave, which he took on admirably. And then Dave became reader in photography in 2003. I think it's probably fair to say, and no offence to you, Dave, but you've probably fallen off the radar a little bit in the last few years. And in fact, I'm sure there are people here who have even heard of you. The younger people, of course. So we're going back, really, to look at your very first project, your first in-depth project, as it were, even although the project probably only lasted a day, and basically, although maybe 14 rolls of film in one day, back in 1981. Now, I was going to say that probably 1981 is well before most of you were born, but looking around the audience, that's probably not quite the case. So in 1981, and the whole photographic landscape, of course, was really very different in 1981. Serious photography, broadly speaking, was made in black and white, and serious photography tended to be documentary, I suppose. So we were before the explosion of colour photography and constructed photography and so on. So in 1981, Dave had really only just begun photography, and although he'd taken a few sort of, broadly speaking, individual street photographs before 1981, this was your first project. So maybe, and this is the subject, of course, of the Café Royal book that you're attempting to vlog tonight. So looking at these pictures, first of all, can you say something about your idea before, as you were getting on the train to London, what you were really thinking about here?
Yeah. Okay. So prior to this, I'd just been taking a very enthusiastic snapper. I was working as an assistant photographer, but no way a full-time photographer as such. And I was immersed in street photography, the kind of study of it. People like William Klein and Robert Frank, etc. Particularly William Klein, I think, for this project. In fact, I remember pawning my typewriter to buy Klein's book, Tokyo 188. That had a huge influence on me. It occurred to me, rather immodestly, that there'd be hundreds, probably thousands of photographers at this event, but that most of the work that came out of it would be for newspapers, set on page level, etc., etc., that may not have the kind of poetic layering that it could have for such an amazing event. I mean, in my arrogance, I thought I could get underneath the skin of the event somehow. When I got there, because my ideas changed a wee bit, what was overwhelming about it for me was the way that it brought together such disparate people, races, ages, backgrounds, almost in a way, there was a kind of religious fervour that permeated the whole thing. It was hysterical. So I just got looked into it, particularly the business of the crowds. So I think that's the second one. Isn't it?
But I mean, was it the case that you had decided early on that day to concentrate on the crowds, concentrate on the spectators, and have nothing to do with
Yes.
the event itself.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes. Yes. And did you have a preconceived idea of what your pictures might end up saying in the final?
Not really. I mean, my naivety in those days can't be overstated. I mean, I couldn't. This work hasn't been disseminated until now. Some of these images I haven't unearthed. Had I shot it digitally, interestingly enough, some of them would be done. So it's great to look back through it. And Café Royal Books, which you probably know as the overall kind of project, it's an incredible initiative, and it's digging back into work, particularly around at this time, that might never have seen the light of day. So that's why it's happening now.
So it was an editing process, wasn't it? As so much street photography is. You shot, I think, 14 rolls.
Yeah, roughly.
14 rolls at 35mm. So then you're editing it down to what, a dozen or 15 or something like that. So throughout the editing process, as is common with most street photography, I suppose, you must have edited with a view to your edit saying something.
Yes, I think what you could, the picture that's up there now, this business, and this rolls on into things that we'll talk about in a wee minute with the other work, which seems dramatically different from this, and of course it is formal. But this business of attention in a single image, tension, is something that's always appealed to me. About opposites somehow connecting. But you could draw a line down the middle of that photograph and be two separate pictures. The old people on the right, the younger ones on the left. I don't need to go into too much depth about that. But that I wanted to more than allude to, and that's the way it emerged. And it became a very signal part of later work. As I say, formally, nothing to do with this whatsoever. But for me, there's a sensibility there, even at that stage, that, for better or worse, continued.
And does that sensibility change with time? I mean, when you were putting together this book, and you were editing it down to what these
14 images.
Is it 14 images? Looking back at it from a perspective of 35 years, do you think you looked at it differently to what you did back in 1981 or even 1990?
There are images now that I didn't spot, that I saw this time around it. It's quite surprising. Also, from a practitioner's point of view, it was interesting to see there was, I think, roughly 14 contact sheets. But the mainstay of the work happens within about 3 sheets, consequently. So, I remember this was an insight at the time, but it's very much being reinforced over the years. It's something I tell students. You walk into an environment like that, which is utter chaos, and you think you're not getting anything, blah, 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 and for some reason it all comes, it did to me, it kind of comes at once. That's to do with the way that you're literally moving through everything. This stuff is happening all the time. It's just that you're not in the zone. Do you know what I mean? So that was one interesting thing that I sort of reinforced. And also there's the picture of the Mall coming up. Is that right? We're talking about the Mall. And that white edifice it really, really appealed to me. And Don McCoven writes really well about this kind of stage set, as did you actually, portraiture. You know all you need is something to happen. And you wait and you wait and you wait. When you look through the contact sheets, there's all this writings that you're walking up and down now. This is what I ended up with. And when, the good year, this was the year of the books to Myers, of course, which was kind of on my mind. This was after the books to Myers. And this Goodyear balloon just coming through at the top there, and this lovely shapes going between black and
So, of course, there are all sorts of ways you could read this work now, knowing that that's in the context of 3 or 4 months after the Brixton riots in 1981, with the blanket there. But that image, of all the images in the series, it almost encapsulates the whole thing, doesn't it?
You can see it.
The small black kid climbing up the pillar, the Goodyear balloon in the background, it's perfect. I mean, it could be, I don't want to over-flatter the David, but it could be a Robert Frank, It's just such an amazing picture.
Well, I'm going to flatter myself. William Klein himself is very keen on the telephone box picture, believe it or not. He managed to see it somewhere. He wrote me a little card, which I still have, because it was very much inspired by me. But that telephone box thing, mean, I'll never take another picture like that in my life. I knew that when I took it. There's so much going on.
That's a fantastic.
So much, even the monarchs, the Queen's thing on the top of the box there, and you can just see Charles Brennan and the flags, the guy with the binoculars, the multiracial aspect. It's just, and it just, when I pressed the button, the shiver went down my spine.
And of course, I mean, you make your own luck, I know that, but formally, it really works as an image, doesn't it? In terms of the composition and the repetition of shapes and so on. It really is an amazing picture. So, moving on, and of course England, my England, that nowadays for us in Scotland, it has certain resonances of English nationalism, doesn't it? So, we can interpret these pictures as the years and indeed the decades go on in slightly different ways, and they have different resonances.
Oh, definitely.
And there's a lot of pictures of exhausted people in this series.
I remember with that one, it's this thing about getting in this kind of documentary sense, the angle and the position. I was desperate that those bottles should be seen to going into that guy's head, the sailor and that came back to me, this how I was on the ground. Why shoot it from that angle rather than off and everything?
I mean, they're amazing sophisticated pictures for one who was visually relatively naive. You've not been at it very long.
No, not at all.
So there was a certain intuitive nous about your picture making at that time. And what's going on here?
Well, people sleeping out the night before, and this is a guy with kind of punk style haircut being woken up by the police because presumably the event is about to happen, removing people, making space for what was to follow, and that's the palace in the background. I think you can see.
Oh yes. I mean, half the people in your pictures look bonkers,
It's not the intention, actually. Well, some half of them maybe were. Again, this kind of dissonance here between, it seemed cruel. In those days, we didn't think so much about these things. But the mouth of the subject and the cheesy grin of Diana and with those perfect teeth in the pocket. And that's kind of playing that off.
And more images of perfect teeth.
How in that balloon they look kind of Indian. Quite strange. And of course we know that particular bubble is going to burst quite, how we know it now. Quite dramatic.
So this was obviously late on in the day because it's dark.
This is the night before.
Oh, it's the night before.
Yes.
Okay.
Years.
So the project started the night before and finished on the day.
Yeah, I know that when it wound up. This is a real sign of the times. Can you imagine the police allowing you access to that? This guy's having a fag and throwing himself on the ground. And look at Bobby's helmets. Just strolling in amongst us. Can you imagine doing that these days? Not a chance.
And then the last picture, which is...
well, we're back to this opposite thing again. This is a program seller. Again, making sense of that kind of chaos is very, very difficult. I don't think I could do it, actually. You need to be so kind of fancy. But this, I can't remember if it was a boy or a girl. It might be a girl, actually. I left the program seller. I remember seeing it in amongst the crowd. Actually, he's an interesting person. Actually removing them, and I noticed there was a kind of echo of the design of the T-shirt with the wall. You see the wall against it. So I was just photographing her, and this woman, she just walked in. With that, you look at her face and see who are you, blah blah blah. But of course, the part was saying, "Try it."
And the irony of this punk kid, selling this establishment magazine of the Royal Wedding, and then of course, so there's the tension between that, the punk kid and establishment, and this woman who's much more establishment, looking in some sort of askance.
Well, I believe the body language is
No, it's a great image. and just incredible stuff for for a 10-year-old photographer to be doing.
If I could say though, I hit the ground running in photography, although I got my comeuppance because I got my comeuppance many times because technically I just wasn't there. But being a musician, I think the business of form and content, I translated it into the vision as best I could. So I think I had a sense of being fair to myself.
So in other words, the aesthetic is important, but then so is the content. And so I don't want to put words in your mouth here,
they're better than that.
But both the form and content are really, really important to you.
Yes.
The picture can say what you like, but unless there's that seductive quality of an image that is well constructed, then you're almost wasting your time. Is that fair?
Yeah, even when it gets very minimal, as it does towards the end. I like it to be a toe tapper. I like it to be toe tapper.
You'll end up on radio too, do you?
Well, I have done.
Okay, so moving on then. So that was 1981. So, I did wonder whether we should do this Q&A starting today and working backwards to 1981. That might be an interesting way of doing it. But we've decided to take this chronological approach. So let's see where you went to from there, from 1981. Well, you worked with Mayfest, didn't you? You did some work with Mayfest?
Yeah, in Glasgow,
In Glasgow. And then your first major commission, which was Pictures from No Man's Land, which was an Arts Council, Scottish Arts Council as it was then, commissioned artists in residence at St Margaret's School for Girls. Quite brave to commission
I was broke.
a male photographer.
No, it was for them, it was very brave, but for me I didn't want to do it at all.
So there's a divergence here. You've gone from that classic street photography, on the hoof, observational photography, into something that in the main is a lot more constructed and a lot more almost self-conscious. And this is the first picture, and this is the picture on the cover. Do you want to just say something about this?
Well, again, there's a sensibility here. I don't want to make too much of it, but for me it's the case. It might sound like nonsense, and it gets even more nonsensical as we progress, actually. But this business of opposites somehow being related to the point of, integration almost. Talked about that in the Royal Living stuff. For here, in this case it's maybe a bit more obvious, but throughout this project, you'll see this playing off in the book. Page plays off against page, young against old. It's not rocket science, but that's like the kind of motif. The few notes that one plays around with. That's not to make it too kind of self-conscious. It's very enchanting. This inherently, these girls were 40 years old already to me, and did at the time.
And that's because of the way that you interacted with them when you made the pictures.
Well, it's also the way that they're dressed, and there's something about their physiognomy almost, So you go through these.
But a definite diversion, and you were very aware of it. So you changed from 35mm black and white to 120 black and white. It sounds nerdish to say, you put it like that. But of course, the way you use a 120 Rolleiflex is quite different from the way you use a 35mm.
Well, I didn't have a clue. My first half of those rolls didn't come out. I didn't know they were on the camera.
But they're so beautifully constructed. And this picture here, I used to show this I used to do this modular group portraiture when I was at Navy. And I used to show a couple of these. And I still remember the student saying to me, God, it's really lucky to get that. These two figures in the background, with the boat, just at the right time in the picture. And of course it wasn't lucky because you'd waited for it.
And I was drunk.
And you were drunk.
And they were drunk as well. It's extraordinary experience, the whole thing. So this is Irving Penn impacting,
So you've already mentioned some of your influences, Robert Frank, obviously, William Klein. By the time you get into this more constructed work, remember we're still in 1985, or 84. We're still looking 30 years ago here. Was Irving Penn a particular influence
Yes.
in that too?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, it's like, when I first looked at Irving Penn, I thought, so what? I had to do it myself. I realised how difficult. How do you photograph 4 people in a lump of wood? It's very, very difficult. And so I revisited Robin Penn and various others. So the age range of the girls was from 3 to 18. But, and it received a lot of attention. It kind of propelled me into territory that I was just not really prepared for, to be honest. It was a wee bit too much. That's when I got my comeuppance.
In what way?
Well, advertising agencies asked me to do jobs for £2,000 a day that I couldn't do. And here I had for me, I pretended that.
Should have got Colin Gray.
But that's what they do, don't they? They cherry pick names and things. But not just that, there was a whole lot I had to learn. Not just technically, of course, but even theoretically, in inverted commas. And I'm not the world's most kind of stringent theorist, but it's very, very naive, this work, but it's part of its charm, I have to say. For me, it's part of its charm. Some of it I'm not so happy with, others I'm amazed at. But it was just a vehicle for something else. They happened to be girls, it happened to be a girls' school. Don't want more to say than that. It's not. I wasn't really interested, I'm certainly interested in education in girls' schools and things at all. And I've never, photography deals in that kind of political sense extremely. That's one of its main functions. It works brilliantly. But it's never been for me. It's not to say this work isn't political. But whether I'm for or against private schools, there's a couple of hints. It's about growing up, from innocence to knowing, to maturity. That's what it's about. They happen to be girls. But it's received an awful lot of very strange press.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it was quite.
Might be something to do with these long-leaded javelin throwers.
Yeah, I don't know. It was upsetting. But I remember when Edward Gage, now dead, but he wrote the piece in the Scotsman. I actually cried when I read it. There's someone who got it beyond these are girls with gym slips. And Edward did get it.
But you can see why the commercial marketplace would take an interest in this work.
Totally.
Partly because you have the credibility of an artist, and partly, of course, most importantly, because your picture-making abilities in those days was superb. This image is just an absolutely extraordinarily beautiful image, and you can see why advertising agencies and design consultancies would tap into this stuff and say, hey, we can use some of this, we can use this guy's profound sense of form and picture making for our own interest.
But and of course, I lived off that. I needed that because by now I was a photographer and I needed the money. We don't make money doing things like that. In these days, one didn't sell prints or they were just one didn't.
So moving on then, fairly rapidly, your next project was a commission from the Scottish Post Office for their 350th anniversary, and in a way, it's more of the same in terms of your picture making. You're still using, a 240 square camera. You're constructing your portraits in the same way that you did in the main with the Schoolgirls project, and they are really, really beautifully constructed, wonderful portraits.
I think this is a lot simpler in some respects in terms of what it might be trying to say. When they approached me, it was on the back of the St. Margaret's thing, and they said, we want the same, as in all that publicity. I said, you won't get it, it's the post office. And you're making a mistake. Give me the money and let me do. I had a particular project which to this day I regret not doing. And you can put your name on that, but they wouldn't buy it, so it had to be the post office. So this is a very, I think, my humanistic take, on the workers. It was too humanistic for them, and they fired me after 9 months, actually. And it ended in very, very bitter stuff.
Because they were looking for technology and slickness and modernity. And
they were worried about what's come to pass, which is that they would be privatised. And they wanted this. They kept telling me they had a nice red van up in Aberdeen now. It ended very, very badly, but I'm fond of some of these pictures still. I think there's less to them than the St. Margaret's work. But I'm still fond of these.
Less to them in the sense that what we were dealing with in St. Margaret's work had a real content in terms of this young and old, this duality thing. And the duality thing isn't coming over to the same extent.
No,
but you can see, I mean, that fantastic book. And I can remember you telling me that you got this guy who was the engineer, was he?
No, he's the head of buildings.
Head of buildings.
And that's the office.
To climb up this, and you got him to take his jacket off.
Well, actually, he was an amateur photographer and said, we want this off, son. And he threw it down.
Yeah.
And I love the little bow tie, and there's all that amazing masonry. And this is the rooftop of the central post. But it took me a month to figure out how to do this. I had this, the canteens next door, and speaking to this guy, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you rarely just fall out of the blue. For me, they don't.
They don't. Not for me either. So, you're photographing ordinary folk here, everyone from the post-dated canteen people, just the ordinary folk that work with the post office, and they just couldn't see how valuable this was.
I think if they had a good marketing mind there, they could have used these as the kind of human face of the post office, and they could have got a lot out of it.
But everybody was obsessed about technology at that time.
Completely.
You remember the days when you used to do commercial jobs, and everybody had to be sat in front of a computer, just to show how technically advanced they were. But lovely.
Yeah. So, all of them took an awful lot of. And of course, it's lovely to work in this way. There's no deadline. You don't have to turn something around in those days. For the publication, I could just take my time day after day after day getting to know these people. You walk in the camera and say, I'm here to do your portrait, which is tough. And rightly so.
Can you remember, Dave, you don't have to answer this, but so this was a commission from the post office in 1985. It was for how long was it?
It was for
3 months.
Oh no! This could have gone for a year. They got rid of me after I think it was 5 months. Actually.
And can you remember how much you got paid?
£4,000, £5,000.
That was quite a lot. Okay, so I'm here in 1988. Did I say 1988? There's almost a complete change. So the post office stuff continues from the St. Margaret's Schoolgirl stuff, which continued from the street photography we did for our wedding, and then there's a complete sea change. And it's almost a prime example of, John Sarkovsky Mirrors and Windows exhibition in the 70s or whatever it was, where he attempts to divide photography into a continuum between a window on the world and a reflection of yourself. And of course, nothing is ever completely a window on the world or a reflection of yourself, but somewhere on that sort of continuum. But here you go from documentary, broadly speaking, a window on the world, broadly speaking, to something that is much, much more self-referential. And the clue, in a way, is in the title, is ecstasies. And there's the title board of the actual work. The way it's typeset, the way it's presented, this notion of is. What the hell is?
Never found it.
And then ecstasies and so on. And we have these very small, intimate, observed, still life images, no people in the pictures at all. Very small, very dark, very intimate. And the clue to what it's about, as I said, is in the title, is ecstasies. Can you say something about this work? And maybe why there's this complete I mean, I think, throughout your career, it's very, very diverse work. You could take, I suppose, Cartier-Bresson approach to photography and do the same work at the beginning of your career as you do when you die. Or, what you've done is you've taken, every project you do has almost been moved on or moved sideways from what you've done before.
Sometimes that's willful, well, remarkable, maybe stupid as well, because galleries like you to have a voice that they can flog. And I think I'd like to stay with this imposition if I can, because it is the most, for me, personally, this is the most important picture I've taken, and since I took this picture, I've been trying to retake it, every day of my life, really. Why? It's probably best found in that interview that you got out of Hamilton Finlay, which is fantastic. Robin interviewed the artist in Hamilton Finlay, talking about the hit you get. Why make work, actually? That's what intrigues me. Why make anything at all? In Finlay, maybe don't even remember, but he talks about a hit. But of course, it's not enough. You want it again and again. And of course, as a viewer, you want it again. It's all been said. You want something new, a new version. And the notion of music in my past, I think, is quite important. In that my mentors, maybe not so much visual people. I adored the photographers I mentioned, and many, many more. But it'd be more someone like Joni Mitchell. Maybe Bob Dylan to a lesser extent, and certainly Joni Mitchell. She moved from a barroom folk singer to avant-garde jazz in the blink of an eye almost. Her fans were going crazy. Now, I'm not Joni Mitchell. I think she's one of the greatest artists in any genre of the last century. But I took my inspiration, and I was a man in a hurry. I was 30 years old when I got photography. Anyway, maybe more importantly, I was ill. I got so ill that I couldn't pursue the documentary route anymore. Despite the fact I'd raised all this money on the back of the St. Margaret's thing to go to America, and do a kind of Robert Frankie thing. Anyway, it was not to be. I was kind of bedridden for quite a while, which you remember about. And I was in a dark place, no question. It's a thing to call it NE, which I still have to a certain extent. And I was really struggling with it, but still wanting to make work. And this was the suite of pictures that came out of it. Well, it was received differently in different places. But as Joni Mitchell said, Stuart, you flagged up a lovely thing the other day from Joni Mitchell. Doing the same thing is boring. I'm not going to carry on with that. But, change is good. I'd rather be crucified for changing, she said. I'd rather be crucified for changing. A bit extreme. I don't know being crucified, but this work was derided out of the photographer's gallery.
I seem to remember somebody, I can't remember who it was, said something like, with maybe just more than the hint of a sneer, truly transcendental. And of course that was, and maybe what this person was thinking about was looking back to that relatively short-lived spiritual work that Minor White did in the 60s, 70s, whatever.
There's obviously a dose of that in there, and a few other things as well. But interestingly, see, went to the photographer's gallery, they phoned me and they said, the comments book has never been so violent, they want to remove it. And I was kind of, I was upset, obviously. But I said, no, don't remove it. I don't have it, actually, I should have asked it. But, again, sometimes tell students about, who likes your work and who doesn't, and why bother. Exactly the same work, exactly the same body of work was shown with Warhol Boyce a year later in Germany. Different context, different audience. Isn't that interesting? Who's right? Neither, actually.
Well, of course, in England, maybe as opposed to Scotland, and probably as opposed to what's going on the continent, documentary photography was king at this time.
Very much.
And it was the beginnings of colour documentary, or just the beginnings of it. So this sort of work suddenly appearing, this sort of self-reflective, very intimate, quite spiritual work, is ecstasy. It's what the fuck's that? and for Glenn Gould, the clue is in the title.
Well, the literature behind this, let's just come clean. It is the cloud of unknowing, it's St. John of the Cross, all that stuff. But ultimately, there's a lot of It's about lots of things. But I'm going to keep going back to
Sorry,
I'm sorry. Because it's, it's just, I don't know. Victor Alba used to talk about, when you were a young photographer, you sometimes take pictures and you take the bed with you, and put it at the edge of the bed. And this was one for me. It still is. But looking at this, I don't see a huge difference between this and the St. Margaret's portrait of the big girl and the wee girl at all. There's none. This is perhaps a bit more interesting. The notion of the cruciform in the darkness and the kind of snake in the light and these things being connected. And then hopefully words break down. You just say, okay, you get it and you don't.
But can I move on now?
You can.
There's only 3 of these pictures here, but of course the whole series was 22. So 22 of these consistently dark, chiaroscuro images, printed quite small, I think only about 8 inches squares.
5 inches.
5 inches square. So tiny, at a time when photographers were doing big fuck-off colour prints, like John Kimberley. So, you could see how people are looking askance and maybe saying, well, are we going back? We're going back in time in terms of and so that whole body of work is here, so I'm sure Dave will
have a look through. They're really fragile, and it's an installation, and this is in January in Michigan. And it moves through, the straight line, the circle, the ellipse, blah blah blah. And there is a kind of musical form to it. Without that.
Okay. So, moving on then, of course, I mean, your best work, can I say that? Or your more enduring work has been within the form of the project, and the project has lasted anything from a day and a half, like your royal wedding, to something that took a lot longer, like your ecstasies and so on. But of course, you're also doing commissioned portraits. You have to earn a living as a photographer. You did annual reports, and you did a lot of very high level commercial work, and you did these very lovely portrait commissions like this one of Michael Clark, the ballet dancer from 1989.
You did one as well.
And we were both commissioned to do one, and I remember being relatively pleased with mine, and then completely pissed off when some of yours. Because it's about. Well, I've always thought that in portraiture, again, it's like the aesthetic. It has to be more than the aesthetic. You have to take more than a beautiful picture. You have to do more than make people look attractive. It has to be more than the light and the composition. It has to say something. And of course, this portrait of Michael Clark, the enfant terrible of modern dance, in 1989, says it all. What does it say to you?
It just reminds me of the horror show. And just what a fluke, I had a whole day with it, and it just wasn't happening. It took me a year to track it down, and it just was not happening. I was getting more and more terrified as the day went on. Because this was a paid commission, it was quite a lot of money for this one. And I got his bed at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We went for breakfast. For him, was chicken livers and wine. And I thought, this is going nowhere. And we were on the way to, he was doing an amazing television series. And we went for breakfast. And I realised that this would be a really challenge for me. And it was inspired by the background, the bricks in that wall, inspired by a picture by Arnold Newman of Stravinsky. Just the side of my eye, I could see that wall, and I knew it was going to perform the same function, the kind of minimalist sense as Stravinsky, blah blah blah. Anyway, went round, side of the table, said, "Do you mind if I do a quick photo?" And with the square format, as probably experienced, you have to be careful with people's legs because they tend to, this kind of foreshot of the legs that burst out. It was as though the strength of his legs was incredibly strong now. It just broke it through the jeans. But again, the contrast between that and the beautiful shape of his face, so delicate.
But it's forgive me, it's more than
that.
I mean, yes, there's the the sawtooth jeans, the strength of his leg. But this is a ballet dancer at the peak of his profession, and he's drinking wine, and he's smoking fags, and he has the reputation of being rude and acerbic and so on. But the delicacy around his head and his face and the way the hands are is a complete juxtaposition with the fags and the booze and all of that. It's absolute. So it's what I mean, I suppose, about the form and content thing. It's absolutely. It's a picture which there's a narrative behind it.
Yes.
That you can actually tell in the story. Okay.
We need to move on.
I think we do. Okay, Alan Bain.
Good.
Yes, we must move on.
Okay, we just say here this business of trying to break out of. I think portrait photographers often experience is what can you say in a single portrait about somebody, and how limiting that can be. It's great when you think you've got it right, but I've often tried to sort of break out of that. So that's a diptych of an A.L. Kennedy with shadow side, as it were, and earth-found merchant. And the notion of the this is a project on poets. The notion of the contact sheet, very functional images of his bedroom, pictures of his girlfriend, blah blah blah, belongings, laid out like a poem, in fact. Just trying to break out of that.
More recent, 2009?
Don Patterson. Phenomenal poet. You know Don Patterson? Terrifying.
And, okay, so these are sort of one-off. And then, as we do as photographers, as we've always done, we take pictures of family and friends. And this is a very early
That's the
day.
first picture I took.
Yeah. 1980.
So that's my first photograph. It was a fluke. It was because of that I became a photographer. He was the guy who was introducing me to. He photographed the band I was in for record sleeves and publicity.
And these great snaps. Fantastic.
By the way, he's here to Jim. Your amazing piece is on the table with incredible piece of writing, absolutely extraordinary.
Jim Wilson. You wrote in that, Jim?
Yeah. Well, you did. It's unbelievable.
It's gorgeous picture.
But it's gorgeous, but it's not. I mean, I like sloppy things that could almost be on willfully, because you have a chocolate box coming. But it's not really. I mean, there's a big crack in that wall. Whatever's going on here is not going to last. I love the sloppiness, but I love the. If you can talk about this in the round, the currency of this to me is it's as important as the exhibition. This work was never shot for exhibitions, right? It was shot something. But the fact that this is still hanging on David Coates's wall in his office is enough. His bedroom is enough for me. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
She's now doing a master's in Japanese language.
So it's photographed with the purest of motives.
Which I still believe in. I guess my son, again, it's this duality nonsense, that business, not nonsense, but it's a horrible word. But it is something that intrigues me. That's how we will later use that again in another context. Just whizzing through. I think the sense here is just of somebody, in this case me, who's just working all the time with no real aim, actually. This business of why you make work. I was reading something quite recently, Paul Klee, and there's a spectrum, isn't there? And we expect artists to reflect society. Some of them want to change society. I'm not very fond of that way of. I mean, I think you change society by, say, David having a picture of his daughter on his wall for 30 years. That changes society as well. But Klee once said, "I make art in order not to cry." And I would say I'm nearer that end of the spectrum. It sounds very self-evident, but it's true. I think the notion that we've somehow evolved beyond that is nonsense. One didn't say that in contemporary art, some contemporary art certainly, but the notion of just you need that head. You need this Hamilton in his head. He wasn't slouching. Anyway, okay. So we're still self-portraiting. This is the duality, 3 into 1 thing again. Family portrait there.
And that's fun with the 20x24 Polaroid.
There's a lovely story behind this. I probably didn't take to tell you. Do you remember it? You don't? My ego was going mental at this point. I mean, this was a televised event. Do you remember? with the SX70 the huge Polaroid. And me, decides he's going to get all these famous festival performers together. It was televised.
Oh, yes.
Fire eaters and jugglers for the cover of a magazine. I mean, nice magazine. It's a lot of fun. And at lunchtime, we were halfway through it, and you were helping, of course, more than you did your own thing as well. But the news came through that Murray Johnson, who Robin was just referred to, had terminal cancer. That, if I ever see that picture, and I thought, fuck, I'm going to do something. And I wanted to show my love for you, so that's what you probably did. But the actual thing itself is extraordinarily beautiful. You can see every bit of dirt on my fingernails. And of course the pump, the cable releases, the heart. But I still love it. Yeah. What was the thing with the two homosexual discs?
I wasn't going to tell. It was exhibited at Portfolio Gallery, and I think it was something about the portrait. And somebody had written in the comments group, really lovely exhibition, but the portrait of the two gay boys is completely distasteful. Is it very poor taste?
Right, anyway, we'll move on.
Okay, move on. So, yes, we should move a wee bit quicker. So, this is from this project which involved 12 polyptychs, can I say that? Triptychs, findings which are sweet. Very, very autobiographical, shot on SX70. Do you want to just say something about it, Dave?
Well, it's a very indulgent piece of work in some ways. You know, SX70, it was after my father died, which is what this image is about. And it's very metaphorical. It's kind of outrageously pictorial in some respects and just appealing to the eye. But it took two forms. There was these set of 12 with these little, to me they were like 12 tunes on an album or something. In this business you were saying about my work shifting from one thing to the next. It is like, Tom Norman said that, it's a bit like your new album. And you can shift from and you're not a slave to brushstrokes in that way. You know, it's the great thing about photography. It's incredible what you can do with it. So this was it. And also the other form that this took was a video with music that I wrote, a kind of slow dissolve. This was in the days of you could dissolve pictures. It was so amazing.
But I mean, this work certainly much more overtly autobiographical than anything you've done before. I mean, I know everything you've done is to a greater or lesser extent autobiographical. This one much more overtly so. And I think it's the only body of work where you've actually applied text, where you've actually written some text with your work.
Until now.
Until now.
Stuff going on just now.
Okay.
Well, let's never leave time towards it.
No. Okay. So let's just move on. Your work is becoming. You've obviously progressed to constructed work, to colour work, clearly, and this is perhaps the most minimal of your work. Again, the clue to what it's about comes from the title, and maybe I could just go through this. This is so that's what it looks like on the wall. Just to go back again. It's called Source, and here there's a very strong relationship between your visual picture medium and your music. And can we also see that there is something similarly spiritual in the broader sense of the word going on here?
Yeah, you could. The spirituals are all good. I mean, one had to see this. So, I mean, it is an installation piece, a metre square, and there's a kind of fringe of lightning around all of them, which just, you know, you can't really see. And they kind of shimmer when they're side by side. And so you have this kind of central void. On either side of that was a little crack in the void, and on either side of that was just like an explosion of light or matter or self, if you like. I don't know when you take that.
But it looked amazing in the space, you know, and really very, very contemporary in a way. You know, if your ecstasies was perhaps looking back to a certain extent. In terms of the scale of this, these are metre square, they're quite minimal. There's no text to go with it, just one word as a title. This is 1995. Very, very contemporary for that time.
It's also there was music, although painter music was to see certain American influences and Rothko, people like that. I wasn't so interested in that. I was more interested in the photographic, not the painter.
Yes. But you're still aware of what people say through the work.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Despite the fact that, like so much of your work, you're not giving very much away except through the title. And the title itself is ambiguous to a certain extent. So therefore, you're setting your audience back on their own sensibilities and the way they relate to the work to find meaning in it.
Yeah, well, particularly something like this. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so this is coming a little bit more up to date.
Will we finish soon?
We'll be finished soon. So this is Stillness and Occurrence, and again, what's it about? Well, the clues in the title.
Well, that's all the opposites doing again.
Yeah.
The implication being that they're both the same. It's a series of, at least in 5 years to do it. People don't swim in the North Sea very often.
On dull days.
Well, the light had to be very. My work became increasingly typological from then onwards. And they're revoltingly soppy. But, well, not revolting, they're incredibly soppy. Although some people actually feel a bit threatened by this, there's a sense of dis-ease.
And the prints are astonishing.
The prints are.
Okay, so coming a little bit more up to date, this is only 13 years old. One taste, never changing. And here,
Same again. Two things are one. So this is a cedar tree at a Zen temple, photographed throughout the day. If you carry on with this, okay? And I think, if you go to the next slide, I'll explain it better than I can. So, the panel on the left is taken from the right-hand side of the central panel. The panel on the right is taken from the left-hand side of the central panel. So to me there's there's supposed to be this notion of some kind of timeless echo. This is a slice of time, but in fact this goes on forever. And so there's a series of 8 of these. And I thought Tom, as ever, people who can write properly, there are many here today, several of these. Best just leave it at that. But it is about something that changes but never changes. It's not rocket science, probably more complex.
was that the beginnings of your fascination with Japan? And
yes,
Zen?
that was done in Japan, yes. And even the Buddhist thing, the works aren't about Buddhism. It's a bit like St. Margaret's. It's a convenient vehicle. Because the business of seriality and typology and things is very Western, not Japanese. But to make the work in Japan and on temple sites, as I think we're about to come to, was interesting.
Okay, so now you're going into typologies.
Maybe we'll just have a look at this.
Photographs, especially groups of similar photographs, tend to demonstrate that time and space are not laws of physics, but human metaphors, invented to keep everything from happening all at once in the same place.
I think that's quite neat.
That's quite neat. I wish I said it.
Well, I mean, by this stage, I'm a bit of a clever dicky, the royal wedding. But maybe I should have given up after the royal wedding. Anyway,
so there are 88 of these pictures.
88, they're all here.
Yeah. So just moving through these, and I think you said to me that the bells are all different. That's the object at the bottom. But actually, it's not a typology of the bells, it's a typology of the background.
In a sense, it's a typology of the space behind this thing that shifts. The bells are like the anchor point, they're in focus. And it's almost like in Aladdin's lamp, if you were to rub it, you get these different things coming out, these different manifestations. But there's always that anchor, that essence of whatever.
And of course, you don't get sense. I mean, in a way, going back to your ecstasies pictures, these small black and white pictures, 22 of them around a white cube, which
and they're sequenced.
And they're sequenced. 88 of those in a white cube space.
Now,
Still to see.
well, they exist somewhere, but I've never seen them in one space, in a bank, unfortunately.
Okay,
Right.
and then 2009, Flo, do you want to say something about this work?
There's couples by the river. In Kyoto, for hundreds of years, couples have eaten there and courted there. And it's the same thing again, I'm afraid. It's hinting at kind of one thing going on, although there seems to be two. And of course, the river being a fairly obvious metaphor. I'm still keen on metaphor. Again, it's very unfashionable to talk in terms of metaphor. I think that's how we communicate.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about. One of the central questions. I'm glad you raised it because I forgot. This notion of symbol and metaphor in photography. It is unfashionable now.
Well, it's in fact, in contemporary art, it's extremely unfashionable. We shouldn't never should go into it. But I think, this is all metaphor. This whole room is metaphor. None of it's real. It's all metaphor. We can't avoid it. And at the very end, which we're coming to now, would be my take on it. Oh no, one more thing. The illusion of agency.
So this is very recent.
This is about the self as opposed to self-portraiture or portraiture, but it's about, for me anyway, this take on the self. I mean, it's not rocket science these days to suggest that the notion of free will is, to say the least, has come under scrutiny since quantum physics, actually. And this is a little kind of Heath Robinson version. These are figures that were intended for use in architectural models for scale. They're less than your thumbnail. So I've left them on the, what would you call those things? You normally break them off and paint them. And just left them dangling. And in some cases, it's just, some have dropped off. People of many different kinds. It's working out really, it's kind of fascinating. And I just shot the only camera I have is a little Lumix. I don't have a proper camera.
So this stuff's never been shown before?
They were shown at the Cairn Gallery in Tom Piddly showed them here. But I think they will, God willing, they'll reappear in some other form. I'm fond of them, my new friends. But it is, again, it's a notion of some kind of oneness anyway, or source, or it all sounds ridiculously something like that. Words always should fail anyway. And very finally.
And finally, yes, you've really whittled it down, distilled it down, simplified it.
This for me is my equivalent of the one that I took to bed. This is going to be just to talk very briefly about something that I'm doing. I've loads and an embarrassing amount of work apart from what we've looked at today. And in recent years I've taken thousands of photographs that I haven't known what to do with, just on a daily basis. And I've not really known what to do with them, but they're just piling up. It's whatever. And I'm working with a writer called Ali Smith, who's, do you know Ali Smith? She's a force of nature, actually. I think we have very similar views on the world. This business of infinite interconnectedness. When you read her work, that's what she's doing. It's breathtaking. One minute you're looking at jelly in the pacemakers, and the next minute you're out on Pluto or something. And she's just pulling it all together, and it's a fantastic way of knots. She used my work for book covers down the years. And we were in contact recently, and I said, we never met, and you've seen stuff that's on my website. I've got all this stuff. Would you like to have a look? She got very excited about this. So we are in collaboration.
And is this one of the collaborations?
That would be, I don't know what's going to happen with this work. Maybe nothing. All I can say is that it's the most pleasurable creative experience I've ever had. And if nothing happens with it, I don't, because one would need her permission, of course. She's a novelist.
But this image is the beginning, or was it the beginning of a new body of work, do you think?
No, but it just summed up everything. You've got a void with an equal sign, a match. you like these, they disappear, you know, it's like metaphor but no metaphor. It's, you know, to borrow from Buddhism, the great equanimity. Everything is equal because everything is equally unreal. Which sounds like nonsense when you think there's people getting murdered in Syria as we speak, but somehow it connects in a way that I can't do before. This is just the way I work. No tablets of stone being handed out here today, I hope, because I mean, this is just what I do. People work in many, many different ways, and I hope we can celebrate that more than it is actually, to be honest. You know, pillars of excellence rather than this kind of overarching, the concept rules, you know.
Well, according to the
Well,
time,
you've done it.
the time elapsed on my computer is 57 minutes and 41 seconds.
Well done, you.
So that's not bad. So, Dave, thanks for that.
Oh, thank you.
It's just great to have done this.